So I wanted to start by telling a little bit about what ioby does. I like to think about ioby as an organization that gives a little TLC to all the residents out there who are starting to lead projects. We center residents in neighborhoods because we know that they have a unique bundle of information about the built environment and the social infrastructure that is necessary to usher in new solutions and to steward them in the long term. And we know that residents encounter a common set of barriers to participation, and a lot of them are unnecessary red tape. Things like lack of 501c3 status, lack of funding, lack of understanding about municipal decision-making processes, fear that no one will believe in their idea, fear of leading alone. And so everything ioby provides is designed to eliminate those barriers and to say to the resident with that great idea for their community, yes, we believe in you and we're here to support you. So ioby provides fiscal sponsorship, funding, a crowdfunding platform, one-on-one coaching for every leader, along with tools and resources. And so far, we've been able to help nearly 3,500 projects raise over $18 million over the past 14 years. But why do we care about this? Why not just let decisions get made by credentialed experts and established organizations? To me, I think there's two reasons. The first is that we believe that a diversity of opinions and perspectives informs better outcomes. It's because we know that our society is fractured and that the health of our democracy is at risk. When we escalate issues to the national scale and simplify them, it's easier to pick a side and demonize the enemy. When issues stay local and complex, we can make room for diversity of perspectives and see commonalities. And second, we know that participation begets more participation. Organizations and opportunities that allow people to learn, debate, vote, make decisions together are habit building and lead to people being more likely to vote and to be active citizens. So tonight, we're going to hear from people who are leading neighborhood projects with ioby support. We call them ioby leaders. After the panel, you'll have opportunities to jump into a breakout session with some of the most inspiring leaders that we've had an opportunity to work with this year. One other quick note on this panel tonight, I suspect that in addition to talking about leadership, somebody is probably going to say the word citizen. And I just want to be clear that we're not talking about a relationship to government, the state, immigration status, or anything like that. This is simply about resident participation in community and civic life. And I invite our panelists to use any different word choices that you want. So to start us off, I want to talk about civic leadership as a muscle. It doesn't make sense to go to the gym once every 4 years and expect to have six-pack abs. And so there's no reason to expect that showing up for democracy once every 4 years and think that everything is going to go well. Democracy needs nurturing through many pathways, with all of us voting, showing up to public meetings, staying informed on topics, volunteering, sharing testimony, and paying taxes, and showing up for our neighbors. And I think if you'll allow me to take the muscle metaphor a little further, the big theme that connects our panelists tonight is that everyone here plays a role in strengthening. And strengthening exercises take the form of resources like money, training, engagement, education, access, and everyone here has a fascinating and provocative angle on strengthening civic leaders. So I'm going to stop talking and I'm going to start turning us over to our panelists. I'm going to introduce each of them briefly and then invite them to introduce themselves more fully and as we begin our questions. We're honored and grateful to have with us here tonight Dr. Carmen Rojas, the president and CEO of the Margaret Casey Foundation, and previously the co-founder and CEO of the Workers Lab. Shamichael Hallman, the former senior library manager at the historic Cossett Library in Memphis, currently a Loeb Fellow at Harvard's Graduate School of Design. And Ioana Paraskevopoulos, the co-founder of Action Tank in Cincinnati, a member of ioby's board of directors. They are all true innovators, and you'll be hearing from them much more about their work over the next 45 minutes. So I want to start off by hearing from each of you about how you got started doing this work. And as we go through these round of questions, feel free to jump in if you have responses to each other. At the end of our panel, I'll open this up to everyone else joining us on Zoom this evening. I'd like to start with you tonight, Carmen. Could you tell us a little bit about your journey to the work that you do now and what kept you energized along the way?
Sure. So first and foremost, congratulations all. I'm really so happy to be here, and it is quite a feat to get this many people onto a Zoom in the East Coast evening. So I'm just gonna say big ups, whatever you're doing is clearly working out for you all. And I'm so glad to be here. I have kind of a circuitous route. So I'm an academic by training, got a PhD in city regional planning. And city and regional planning is a funny field in that I think most people imagine doing surveys of landscapes, building buildings. But there's also the political economy and social life of cities. And I was really lucky to be able to focus my academic work on social movements in Latin America. And I've always been curious about what it is that sort of ignites the spirit inside of people who don't have enough, who are excluded, who are marginalized, to fight for something more and better. And so I've always had this curiosity. I was like, I'm like generally like a curious person, and accidentally happened into philanthropy. I am, funnily enough, like a person of the left who is committed to a socialist agenda and believe that money matters. And so I've been sort of holding this tight space of contradiction where I have a set of ideological beliefs and have had the privilege of working within institutions where our job is to move resources, and primarily private resources, in service of supporting people to come together and fight for a future that we all want. I'll say philanthropy specifically, I'm a bit of an odd duck in that maybe for like two reasons that stand out for me. One is that I am clear that with or without foundations, donors, and philanthropy, people are going to come together and fight for this future, that like we are an ancillary intervention. And with that being said, I'm also clear that with philanthropic resources, we create a more even terrain for the fight for the future that we want. And two, we as an institution are committed to a type of philanthropy that isn't about unlocking more philanthropic dollars. We are focused as an institution, from our board to our most junior staff person, to using our philanthropic resources to reanimate people's belief that government could work for them. That our dollars that are in our tax system are actually ours and should not be hoarded by a few, should not be used to subsidize private corporations, should not be used to hurt, prison, and incarcerate people, but instead they should be the kindling underneath which people's dreams and aspirations are realized. And so I would say that as sort of a closing thing. And again, thank you, and I'm so happy to be here.
That's great. And then before we move on, Carmen, I just wanted to ask you one more follow-up question. Could you talk maybe a little bit, there's people here who are coming at this conversation from all different perspectives. Could you maybe just frame for us a little bit about maybe why you're interested in shifting philanthropy away from sort of like business as usual models to help shift power in this way that you're talking about?
Yeah, I mean, if I had to do like a quick and dirty set of caricatures of what philanthropy is and has historically been, it's mostly either individuals or corporations that have figured out that not paying money into our tax system and creating these privatized institutions to get individual credit is so much better. It feels so good, right? Like I make a bunch of money, I create an institution with my name on it, I get to give away that money. Nobody gets to see that I took money out of our tax system or withheld resources from our tax system. And then people really like me because I get to give out more money. We are a unique institution in that we don't have any living donors. We're a totally private board, 50% of which are on the ground grassroots organizers. And I think that there is a way in which the business of usual of philanthropy is a lot of like self-celebration and centering, right? So like one of the biggest projects of 20th century philanthropy has been to say the charter school movement. And at no point have we asked, why don't our public schools have enough money? And we don't actually tie back the fact that our public schools don't have enough money because our largest taxpayers are holding money from that system. And so for us, shifting power means making visible the ways in which rich people, corporations in this country are hoarding a set of resources on the backs of millions and millions of people who are toiling every day, imagining that their fate is the result of their own poor decision-making, as opposed to the result of the greed and the failures of our democracy.
Fantastic. We're not pulling any punches tonight, folks. Great. As always, I am very appreciative of your disruptive and provocative comments, Carmen. Thank you. Shamichael, I'm curious if you can tell us a little bit about what inspired you to do the work that you did and how you came to focus on libraries as spaces of opportunity for civic and community engagement.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. The journey to the library really started about 6 years ago, having some early conversations with the Memphis Public Libraries around reimagining Cosset Library, which is centered in the heart of downtown Memphis. It was the first public library that was built in Memphis and just has this really rich history. And as we were beginning to have these conversations around, well, what is a library? And what sort of adjustments does a library need to make to truly meet needs of its citizens? We started to think about the history of this library. And it is a library that for the first 63, 64 years of its existence, did not really had little to no access for Black people. There was actually another branch that was down the street that was the Negro branch. And of course, it was the space that got the inferior books, that got the books that were torn, the books that were discarded. But there were some amazing librarians at that Negro branch that took those resources and really made some great things happen with it. And then starting in the late 50s and going through the early 60s, there are a number of lawsuits and sit-in demonstrations. In fact, many of them in the early 60s that were done by Black college students who were at the local HBCUs, fighting for equal access to public space. It was amazing to sit down and read and look at the arrest records of 18 and 19-year-old Black college students who were saying, why can't I use this space for my research? Why can't I come in here and get a book? And we were very blessed. We were very lucky that many of those folks, we found in early 2017, that many of those folks were still in Memphis and still alive and still fighting for justice. And so we thought, hey, there's a very rich history here of struggle to this branch and for this branch, and to access knowledge and information. And how might we build on it? How might that be a part of the library's history and legacy? How might we think about taking this reimagining of the branch and create a space that really create a sense of community that brought people from all backgrounds of life kind of back into public life in a way that they could see themselves as stewards and as advocates, as people that could actually shape their city's future? And how might the library play a role in that? And so for us, that really started out, just kind of through acts of co-creation, of really making sure that the space that we were creating was of and by and for the community. But then also began to influence the programming and the collection development and other things that we did in that space.
Incredible. Thanks for sharing a little snippet of that history, that deep and rich history. Can you talk a little bit about civic renewal and what that's meant in your work?
Yeah, so as we started that project, and that project was a part of a larger project that was happening in the country called Reimagining the Civic Commons, which was not only playing out in Memphis, but was also playing out in Philadelphia, Detroit, Chicago, and Akron. That there was this sort of an outcome of, okay, if we're thinking about strategic investments in our public space, what are some of the outcomes that we might be looking at? And one of those outcomes was civic engagement. And so as we started talking to, I say we, the folks on the ground in Memphis, started talking to what was happening on the ground in other cities, we began to sort of see how parks and community centers and waterfronts were thinking about this. And that really led us to start talking to other libraries. And so a couple years ago, I launched an initiative that I called Libraries as Bridges, which was an effort to understand the civic impact that public libraries were having across the country. And I was able to talk to about 100 library systems across the country, urban libraries, suburban libraries, rural libraries. And what I was able to discover was, and it's amazing, public libraries are doing an amazing amount of work here. But I've been able to sort of categorize that work, thanks to, for instance, the New York Public Library, into 3 buckets of impact. And that first bucket is civic knowledge. So this is the degree to which the library uses its collection, its resources, its programming to inform the community about just what's happening, how local government works, who's in office, what are their responsibilities, why you should be looking at the entire ballot when you go to vote, right? And how to hold elected people accountable. And one of the key programs that we did there was this event called Citizen Fest. And it was as you talk about citizen, right? This was a citizen as a verb, citizenship as a verb. Like how do you live this thing out, right? And Citizen Fest was a day-long celebration of what does it mean to be a citizen? How do I show up in my community? And we partnered with some amazing folks out of Seattle, folks at Citizen University, and they came down and we worked with the community on power. And we came away, and thanks to our friend Eric Liu up in Seattle, of what is power. And power is, what is citizenship, right? And citizenship is power plus character. That in order to be a citizen, you need to be exercising both power and character, right? That if you have a bunch of power and no character, you're gonna mess some stuff up, right? But if you've got a lot of character and no power, you're not gonna be getting anything done. And so we talked a lot about that, and that kind of fell within that civic knowledge bucket. But there were 2 other buckets that were important. And the second bucket was sort of civic attitudes, right? Of thinking, okay, well, hey, this is a public library, and in theory, we're open to everyone. Everyone should have equal access to this space, no matter where they slept last night, no matter how much money they have in their pocket, no matter what, if they've gone to school or not. This is a place that everyone shows up. And what happens when everyone shows up? That's not always, rosy peachy. That sometimes there's real conflict. Sometimes there's real tension when when different people from different walks of life show up. And that's okay. That's actually, I think that's the presence of that tension, the presence of that conflict lets us know that we're actually doing our job, that we're actually opening up the space to the entire community. And so that dealt with the civic attitude. And then this last bucket was civic behavior, which was actually encouraging people to show up in their communities, to make sure that they went and voted, to make sure that they found ways to be involved in their community, whether that was a nonprofit board or neighborhood association, right? And so we tried to make sure that as we were designing this library, and as we were building out a collection, as we were thinking about sort of programs and ideas that we wanted to advance, that these 3 buckets were really, really important for us. Now, things kind of came from that, right? Kind of out of that civic knowledge bucket came civic literacy, helping people understand what they were looking at, finding reliable news sources and lots of information. And so all of that, we think, kind of falls under the civic renewal bucket, right? But lots of other things that we can continue to talk about in that category.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that. I want to turn to Ioana now. Ioana, can you tell us a little bit about what the problem or the opportunity that you saw that you were addressing when you started Action Tank?
Absolutely. Thank you. So I'll say Action Tank is a nonprofit that's very hyper local for now anyway. We're looking at expanding, but we work kind of at the intersection of civic engagement, public policy, and the arts. We're very focused at public policy as it's made at the local government level. And our biggest program is called City Council Bootcamp, and it trains people in how to make public policy, either as elected officials or as community advocates. So the problem that we were looking to solve was, I'll say my background is in government. I'm an attorney by training. I worked for the federal government for a while, and then moved back home for family reasons and ended up working as chief of staff to Cincinnati, Ohio's vice mayor. And noticed two big things when I was in that job. The first one was in my training as an attorney, I realized, wow, I basically have a doctorate in government. And at no point in my education journey did anyone ever train me on what local government means or how it does or how to engage in it. I also saw from where I sat at City Hall over and over dozens of times local residents who were volunteering their time to advocate on behalf of their communities, usually neighborhoods, for things that were highly important to them. Whether it was, we need another stop sign at this intersection, we need to overhaul historic preservation policy in our city. They often engage with very uneven results, and more often than not, this will surprise no one. The people who were more successful because they were wealthy or had like personal contacts with elected officials or had long-standing personal relationships with elected officials. And we just thought there's this massive gap in our civic infrastructure. It's a huge shame that more people don't understand and know how to navigate this process, because it should be the most accessible form of government. It should be the place where an individual or a collection of individuals should be able to have the most impact when they decide to advocate on behalf of their communities or neighborhoods, or their jobs if they work at nonprofits. So that was the problem that we were seeking to address. So we put together a 6-month training program called City Council Bootcamp, where we trained folks on how public policy is made at the local level. And because that sounds maybe like a sexy topic sometimes when you talk about it in forums like this, in reality, it's a little bit dry. So we use the arts to train folks on how to do that the best way. So we do a lot with actors, we do a lot with improv artists, we do a lot with poets and dancers, to give folks an opportunity to practice all the skills that they need to advocate effectively at City Hall, but also advocate effectively to the public, and gain traction and get people's attention and make a difference.
Incredible. And so when folks are coming out of this program after this type of immersion in the arts, in this training around all of this, what did you observe about their leadership activities and their willingness to step up?
They do such a wonderful job, and I'm going to take credit for every single one of their successes. So we are in our 3rd cohort, and so far one of our graduates has been appointed to City Council and won re-election, and they're running again. We have another local council vacancy that's being filled because a council member was won a congressional seat, so they need to fill their spot. We have 3 of our graduates are on the short list to fill that spot. So fingers crossed one of them will make it. We have graduates, 2 of them were appointed by the mayor to the Cincinnati Accessibility Board of Advisors. So they're mobility challenged, and they're making a big difference in changing public policy on that front. We have one of our graduates successfully advocated for what's called the Cincinnati Equitable Restroom Ordinance. So now any new public bathrooms in Cincinnati have to be gender neutral. We have folks who are precinct executives for the Democratic and Republican parties. We're nonpartisan. We have our graduate who successfully advocated for $100,000 for their nonprofit in the city budget last term, and on and on. So they're doing great work.
Amazing. Great. I want to switch gears a little bit. At ioby, we have practiced storytelling since the very beginning as a way of reflecting and learning, and sharing that learning with others. And so I'm going to ask each of you to tell a story about your work. And I think maybe just to mix it up a little bit, I'd like to begin with you, Shamichael. If you could tell a story about your time at the Memphis Public Libraries, about maybe a particular program or a participant that made a big impact.
Yeah, so I'm trying to spend a good bit of my time here at Harvard to think about the public library as a site of encounter. I think, you know, we are perhaps as polarized and as isolated and as segregated as we perhaps ever been, right? And I've been a part of a number of national conversations around, like, you know, what does it, like, what do we go from here, you know, in terms of democracy, if that's even something worth saving. Some people might argue that. But you know, across the board, regardless of the conversation that I'm in, four themes almost always come up. And I'll tie this to the story. The first one is that you need responsive media, right? You need media that won't spread lies, that, you know, will tell the truth. The second thing is that you need places. You need places where people can come together, right? You need places where people can have shared experiences, places where people can come together and wrestle, you know, with thoughts, you know, how they feel about complex issues, right? And then not only do you need those places where you can have shared experiences, but then you also need people who have the ability to bridge, right? Who can take different ideas and find ways to allow people to have these sort of conversations. You need these sort of civic bridgers. And then lastly, you've got to have some funding. You know, you've got to have, generally, hopefully you've got support of foundations to be able to do that, right? And so I talked a minute ago about the event that we did that was called Citizen Fest, right? That I think was very much in the spirit of what's been talked about for some of the other panelists. And it was this wonderful event that we saw. We had over 100 people. There were folks from probably 35, 45 different zip codes, people of all ages, people of, you know, even who had different political beliefs. But, you know, through the arts, through food, through some grounding, we were able to have some very basic conversations about aspirations and hopes for the city, aspirations and hopes for our children, aspirations and hopes for how public transit should function and how our schools should function, right? And so I think that those conversations are possible. You know, you know, if we listen to enough of what's happening right now, we might think that these conversations aren't even possible. That everybody has to kind of stay in their, you know, in their sort of silo. But it's possible to bring people together. So that has warmed me. And I would say beyond that, you know, the public library, I just kind of, as a librarian, you know, I'm going to give you kind of a part B of just something that makes me, that I think we should celebrate libraries in just an amazing way. So one day, a gentleman comes in and says that I've been laid off from my job, and the people down the street, the hotel, he was cleaning hotels, so the hotel down the street is hiring. But you have to do that online, right? I said, okay, well, let's help you out. Let's go over to the website, and, you know, we'll show you how to get on, and we'll upload your resume. He says, I don't have a resume. And I said, oh, okay. Well, let's go over, pull up Microsoft Word. Let's start building your resume. He said, I don't know how to use Microsoft Word. I don't know what you're doing here. I said, okay, well, man, you know what? Let's just pull out a piece of paper, get a pen and paper. I just want you just to write down for me what you've done. You know, let's talk about your work history. Let's write down dates. Let's write down locations. Let's write down duties, right? And he does that, and then we eventually make our way to Word. And I start showing him, hey, this is Microsoft Word. It's a word processor. Then you can type, you know, things here. And this whole interaction is about an hour and a half. We ultimately get his resume. We ultimately go to this website. We have to set him up an email address, right? Because you can't apply for the job without having an email address. I get him an email address. He applies for the job. He comes back a couple of weeks later. He says, you know what? I got the job, right? We need places like that, right? That guy came to the public library because there was no other place for him to go. And so as I think about, you know, what does it mean to be able to create spaces where everyone has an opportunity to be able to have a better life? It's just an amazing story. And an amazing example, I think, of the work that public libraries all across this country, regardless of size, are doing each and every day.
That's great. Thanks so much for that. And Ioana, could you also tell us a story about a participant that stands out to you?
Sure. So one of our graduates in our first year, his name, Dan Davidson. I'm just going to call him out by name. Yeah, he'll appreciate it. He was in Cincinnati. He grew up here, and he saw this huge need for an LGBTQ like youth center, and so he founded one. He happened to have great contacts through his job to like free space, and he got all the kind of LGBTQ organizations in the city to work with him. He had a great network. He became the umbrella organization for those organizations, so like Listen, etc., PFLAG. And he said, I want to coordinate these efforts. And then also we need a place for youth to go. We need like a resource center. So he was a caretaker of a church. Through that church, he had access to space that was basically free. So he secured the space. He pooled the organization, like all the organization's resources. He started this nonprofit called Treehouse Cincinnati. And through that nonprofit, and using the skills that he learned in city council boot camp, advocated to city council to obtain funding from the city to help support his endeavor for the first couple of years, and kind of raise awareness of like what he was doing. And they're in the second year of a successful nonprofit right now. So I'm super proud of him.
That's amazing. And Carmen, I'd love for you to round this out by telling us a story about something transformative that you've helped support.
Yeah, there are a couple of things that come to mind. But first and foremost is a group in Kansas City Tenants Union. So it's a group of mostly Black mothers who got together before the pandemic. So just as context, if you are a minimum wage worker in the United States, you can't afford rent in a 2-bedroom apartment in the city that you work in, anywhere. It doesn't matter if you're in Oakland, it doesn't matter if you are in Salt Lake City, it doesn't matter if you're in Dallas, it doesn't matter if you're in Wichita. If you are a minimum wage worker, you cannot afford an apartment. And this pretty remarkable group of women got together and started organizing, and won the state of Kansas and the city of Kansas's largest contribution to public housing in its history. They just won the start. The start is a $50 million investment in low income housing, which is unheard of in the Midwest, that a foundation isn't building affordable housing, but that the government is actually investing in public housing. And I have been just so excited and inspired by the ways people come together to fight for a better future. This is like a very concrete example. I think secondly, like I would be remiss if I didn't mention this, because when I started, we started a program called Freedom Scholars, where we fund scholars on the left and we give them $250,000 an award. That's just like an award in recognition of your work. And so today we announced our next round, Freedom Scholars, and it's just amazing. So, you know, Ruthie Wilson Gilmore is a Freedom Scholar. Barbara Ransby is a Freedom Scholar. Kanga Yamada Taylor is a Freedom Scholar. So to be able on the one side to support this really amazing organizing that's happening to transform people's lives, and on the other side, to enter directly into the fight for ideas and imagination that has the possibility to seed in our mind a future in which we can start to like root into the possibility of liberation, has been such an amazing part of this job. So I'll put a little link into these awesome videos that folks on our staff made on this round's Freedom Scholars.
That's great. Thank you so much for that. In a couple minutes, I'm going to go ahead and open up the discussion for questions from some of the folks who are joining us here on Zoom. And before I do, I just wanted to ask, so if you do have questions, start thinking about them now, and go ahead and indicate in the chat if you'd like to ask a question. So start thinking about them now. And as folks are brainstorming their questions for the panelists, I just wanted to ask each of you if you could just share one takeaway from this conversation that you're experiencing listening to your fellow panelists talk about, like the way that they're contributing to strengthening this civic leadership. And I think this time I'll go ahead and start with you, Ioana, if that's all right.
Sure. So what strikes me about everyone's answers is how everyone is super hyper focused on the individual, even though we have much larger goals in mind. We're telling stories about how we're directly impacting one person at a time and empowering one person at a time to make a bigger difference. To me, that's like the most exciting thing. And I have to say, Shamichael, listening to you talk, I'm on a group text with my mom and my sisters right now. And like this week, the theme has been, we're all discovering new things that our public library offers that we didn't know about. And we keep texting each other like, oh my God, did you know that the public library lets you borrow these like really high powered telescopes, for example, so you can like take them home and look at what's going on in the sky on any given night. And I would love to ask you if you could call out like the most unexpected thing that your public library system offers to residents in your town, because seriously, there's so much stuff that folks don't know about.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So we actually are, and I see some people doing tool lending. Yeah, that's an amazing thing. We actually, so the branch that I was that we've been working to renovate is going to be opening here very soon. And we actually have a range, kind of building on the tool library. We actually have a range of maker equipment. So you could come and get a sewing machine and a sewing table. You could get a GoPro camera. You could get a laptop that has Adobe Creative Suite on it. Lots of really like we recognize that that our libraries needed to be really centered on makers, because there have been a lot of studies around, people in Memphis that were trying to like get businesses off the ground, like whether it was a t-shirt business or soap or like whatever, and just didn't really have the resources. And so that was really the thing that we were working on. And yeah, I think I've been really inspired to see, man, the public library just doesn't do a good job of talking about itself enough. I'll leave it at that.
Shamichael, while you're unmuted, maybe you can go ahead and share with us your one takeaway from this conversation before we open it up to questions.
I see a level of education, of really helping folks understand how to ensure that democracy works for them, right? I think we can't assume that everyone knows that. I grew up in Alabama, and one of the most memorable things for me was going to the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham and seeing the work there, and knowing how many people just didn't know that, right? And even in Memphis, as I talked about, the students who did the sit-ins there, those folks are still in Memphis and still living, and no one's really acknowledged them, right? Folks didn't even really know about them. So just the theme of education, of helping the current generation and previous generations and future generations understand how to make government and society responsive to their needs was what I'm seeing.
Thank you for that. Yeah, and Carmen, can you bring us home? What's your one takeaway?
Thank you so much. You know what, the thing that strikes me, I keep thinking about this statement that Shamichael made, which is like the library as a site of encounter. And I actually am taking away something different than what Ioana mentioned, which is individual. I am like, keep hearing this idea that we need more durable institutions in communities in order to realize this democracy, right? And these institutions look so different, right? Like they are spaces of encounter. They're spaces where we have to, what is Brene Brown? I'm like a new Brene Brown person. So I'm like one of those obnoxious people who like is new to Brene Brown and can't help but do a quote, but like where you have to look face to face with the other, right? Like you have to be so proximate to somebody who's so different from you, and sort of the places in which we can start to weave a fabric or a tapestry of a world that we want, that these institutions and space actually matters for that, right? Like the durability of our institutions really matter in service of that, be they our city council, be they our libraries, be they our nonprofit organizations and our government. And so that is the big takeaway that I'm taking from this conversation.
That's fantastic. Great. Well, I think we're ready to open it up to questions from our panelists. Dana, do you want to call on folks?
Yeah, I see Fareed with your hands up. Fareed, do you want to just go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question?
Hi, so my name's Fareed Anderson. I live in New Jersey right now. I'm familiar with ioby just from working with different people in Green Thumb and Just Food in New York City. So I was working with them for a few years. And my response to one of the questions is, or at least one of the statements, like what's surprising in the local library. The local library over here, they have video games and DVDs. So I'm a little surprised they still have things like that.
That's great. Thanks. Did you have a question for any of our panelists that you want to ask?
Yeah, I know ioby, they usually work like in California and New York. Do they normally work in New Jersey, or is there anything established in New Jersey, or any plans for it, or they work with congressmen or anything like that?
That's a great question. ioby does operate nationally, and we have some on the ground staff in Cincinnati and Detroit and Cleveland. We don't have any formal work in New Jersey at this time, but we've had a bunch of partnerships over many years. I think
Okay.
there's a lot of ioby leaders across the state, and we can definitely connect you with some of them.
Okay, yeah, just send me an email, a message, or whatever you have to do.
Okay, great. Thanks. Any other questions for our panelists tonight?
Myra, I'm going to go ahead and call on you to unmute yourself. Go ahead.
Sure. Hi. Thanks, everybody. It's great to hear everybody's presentations and all the great work you all are doing. I was wondering if you guys could talk a little bit more about how you got started and how you started getting funding for your projects. I'm curious about kind of the initial stages. I'm in the midst of starting something up and thinking through funding. And so thinking about all you guys' different funding strategies when you were first beginning.
Yeah, I think all of our panelists are starters. So any one of the three of you that wants to go ahead and kick us off, please do.
I can jump in since I run a really young nonprofit. So we founded Action Tank in 2019. And that whole first year, really the whole first 18 months, we were like I had a day job. We were like very much volunteering. And that first year I raised like $20,000, I would say. The way we did it was by socializing the idea, by like crystallizing the idea and refining it and refining it and refining it and shopping it around and talking to folks who we saw as potential partners and potential supporters. We ended up getting a like $10,000 donation that first year from an individual who was like a angel. And then we got a small grant in partnership with another nonprofit. And then we leveraged that grant to raise additional funds through ioby, actually. So a little over $5,000 through ioby. And that was how we got started.
Great. Carmen or Shamichael, did you want to talk at all about early stage fundraising?
So I'm a little bit of a weirdo in this. Like when I founded Workers Lab, we got a $5 million a year gift for 5 years from labor union. So that was weirdo. That's like the weird thing. And now I run a foundation. So I feel like that's I'm like the anomaly in the fundraising universe.
That's great. I think Janae's got her hand up. And there's also a question in the chat. Dana, which way do you want me to go?
Janae, why don't you go for it? And then I'm going to take Kofi's question after Janae. And then we may wrap up from there.
Cool. I hope this is not too much of a downer question, but recognizing that we exist in a structure that can be like violent and dangerous and harmful, and there's so much work to be done. How do you all individually sort of motivate yourself to keep fighting the good fight? Like, what are the things that you have to keep top of mind, top of heart to continue the fight?
Thanks, Janae. That's a beautiful question.
Yeah, Janae, one of the things that are facing a lot of libraries right now are book bans, right? They're like militias, the whole militias are showing up with rifles and like really high-powered, rifles and essentially threatening librarians that they have to remove, books that they don't agree with. And that has not come to our library yet, but certainly a lot of people in my network are now dealing with that. And some people have left the profession because they felt that their lives were so in danger. But I was at an event a couple of weeks ago, and one of the speakers talked about walking into the library as a teenager and seeing a book that highlighted and that reflected his lifestyle. And he said for a long time, he would look at the book. He didn't want anybody to know that he was looking at the book. And for quite a few weeks, he would look at the book. He'd walk in and kind of see, kind of look at the sight line, who could see, if he picked this book up, who would see him. And then one day he came in and he got the nerve to pick it was a magazine, and he picks the magazine up and he picks up a book right next to the magazine so that he could hide the magazine inside the book. And then he said he went to a corner of the library where he knew that no one would be looking, and he opened up the book and then he opened up the magazine, and he said for the first time he felt seen. And he said, you know what, I needed that space. I didn't need a librarian at that moment. I didn't need somebody to talk to. I just needed to be able to see the book that was there. I needed to be able to find a space that I could go and look at the book and see myself. And I recognize that happens more often than librarians know. That because of the diversity of resources that we have available and the books that we have available, people can come inside our doors and see themselves. And that gives me energy to keep them.
That's great. Thank you for that. Carmen, is there anything that you want to add to this question about standing up in the face of violence and other challenges in the work?
I'm like a Angela Davis believer in that freedom is a constant struggle, right? So like even when we win things, we have to fight to keep the things that we win. And as I've already mentioned, and I'm obnoxiously going to say one more time, I'm a new Brene Brown person. And I think that there is this way in which we can be so, I'll speak to myself about myself. I have spent most of my life so hyper focused on fighting and structural and systemic change that I had atrophied my heart and my ability to cry and my desire to fall in love with everybody that I worked with, my ability to give people the benefit of the doubt or to try to like deepen understanding, this like rooting with people. And over the last couple of years, both because of this job, but also because of this national context, I keep getting called back to my heart. And I keep getting called back to the promise, like the beautiful things that happen when you surrender and you fall in love with someone, right? And we fall in love with each other. Like everything is possible when that is true. And so that is, I keep coming back to like holding on the one side. These fights are constant and forever. There are always going to be oppositional forces who don't believe in sort of a multiracial democracy, who don't believe in a just democracy, a just economy. And I just have so much evidence that when people have the space to root with each other, that we can make better things happen. I mean, I'm going to go back to Kansas City's tenants union, right? Like, imagine in Kansas City, this is not the Bay Area, it's not New York City, it's not Brooklyn, it's not DC, it's Kansas City. Folks are coming together to change what people's expectations are about how to live a life with dignity and winning. And so I think that they did that because they had a structural analysis and fell in love and decided to fight for us. And so that's the thing that those are the things that I come back to pretty consistently.
Thanks very much for that. I really appreciate this so much. I'm so grateful to all of you for being here and for all of these fantastic panelists. I feel like we could keep this conversation going for many more hours, but it's time to move us into the next part of our time together. And I know that there's still some questions lingering out there. And so Dana is going to share those with us so that we can take them into our breakout rooms with us as food for thought.
Thanks, Erin. I just wanted to say real quick, like Erin said, so grateful to everyone. And I feel like I wish we had hours and hours to spend. I knew it would be a beautiful conversation. And I know the next part's going to be beautiful too. So to give time for that, I want to just lift up. I'm hearing questions about how do you identify need in your community? How do you build trust in your community, which I know will come up also in these breakouts. And there's also a question about lifting up particularly the beauty of arts and culture work and how that gets woven into the work in your community. So I wanted to name those 3 themes and with a lot of gratitude for you all. And then I'm gonna let Erin bring us into the second half of our last third, I'll say, of our evening together to have more conversations together and remember those questions. Keep talking.
Thanks, Dana. And thanks everybody for bringing these questions. So this is just a fine panel here that we have. Before we transition in smaller groups, I do have an important ask of all of you. At ioby, we know that everyone has something critically important to contribute to their own communities, and that taking that first step into leadership can be incredibly intimidating. Our staff play an important support role to ensure that resident leaders have everything that they need, from funding, fiscal sponsorship, technical assistance, resources, to lead and see those visions come to life. And we can't do this without your support. So I invite everyone here tonight to contribute to ensure that ioby can continue our great work next year. Gifts of every size are welcome and appreciated, and you can make donations to ioby at ioby.org/22. Dana is dropping that link into the chat right now. And while folks are making gifts, if you choose to, I just want to introduce a little bit about what we're going to be doing next. So we've got breakouts with some fantastic ioby leaders that we've been working with, and everybody's going to go ahead and be assigned into one of those rooms. And so I just want to talk a little bit about some of these fantastic ioby project leaders. One of the first people that we've got joining us is DeAndre Nixon of Hero's Journey. This is a restorative justice program, a 5-week transformative change project at the Cuyahoga Hills Juvenile Correctional Facility in Cleveland, Ohio, hosted by Pete. Kyle Reiser of East Westwood Springfest and Trailblazing East Westwood is generating pride and creating community bonds among neighbors and trailblazing for a premier hiking spot in Cincinnati, Ohio. That's going to be hosted by Dawn. Kofi Thomas of Abla Environmentalism and Community Greenhouse is spreading awareness of and engagement with farming, gardening, and environmentalism through Latino Caribbean culture, thought practices in Brooklyn, New York. That's hosted by Tony. Amelia Duran and Anthony Bryant from the Garage Cultural Southwest Fest are serving as an arts and cultural anchor and producing free large-scale art and music festival in Detroit, Michigan. It's going to be hosted by Ross. And Rhonda Rios Kravitz and Cristobal Camacho Gutierrez and Jose Navarro of Poderosa's Mural Project is honoring the lives and work of 9 women trailblazers and inspiring upcoming generations to tell their stories in Sacramento, California. And this is going to be hosted by Metzley. Thanks to everybody who made a donation and a gift to support ioby's work. And thank you so much to everybody on our panel. We're going to end our time together tonight in the breakout rooms. And so before we all part ways, I just want to thank everyone for joining us this evening for this delightful conversation, to thank our staff and their board for all they do to support us. Thanks to everyone who made a gift to support our work tonight. And thanks especially to the amazing ioby leaders that you'll be able to meet in just a minute, and to our fabulous panel, Dr. Carmen Rojas, Shamichael Hallman, and Ioana Paraskopopoulos. Thanks so much. And Ebony is going to take us into our breakout rooms now.